What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Frogs Up TCU Sports Podcast, coming at you with a midweek episode. We are recording here Wednesday evening. We had a lot to discuss on Sunday and too much to cram into one episode, so we have a midweek episode dropping tonight. I am Russ Hodges. That is Anthony North. Anthony, I know you're traveling right now. How's it going out there on the West Coast?
Yeah, I'm out here in Big Ten country in Southern California in Los Angeles. So it's today was a beautiful day. Went and had a nice coffee and breakfast on the beach, and had a bunch of work meetings and stuff. But it was a beautiful day, and we'll be excited to get back to Texas though, and get back to watching the Horned Frogs this weekend.
It's been a slow couple of days for me here. I thought it'd be kind of busy, getting back from Labor Day weekend and working for our paper. We print twice a week, and our Tuesday afternoon deadline came up pretty quick. But once we got through that, it's been kind of smooth sailing here this last day or so. And yeah, excited for more football this weekend. We're in the heat of the high school football season, and then of course getting started with college football here and NFL football. We did our fantasy draft over the Labor Day weekend. I know I talked about that a little bit on Sunday. So let's go ahead and dive right into it here because we have some big things to talk about tonight that, of course, we weren't able to hit on Sunday. The first thing is TCU has another game coming up on Saturday against Nicholls State. We will give our thoughts on that, what TCU needs to do better after a tough loss to Colorado. We will recap the first weekend of action in the Big 12 Conference. We will talk about the conference realignment news that hit about a week or so ago with the ACC becoming the latest conference to make some additions. We'll give our thoughts on that and what that could mean for the future of conference realignment and the future of further rivalries, specifically between the Horned Frogs and the Ponies from Dallas. So before we get into everything this evening, we have our plugs to get through. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Charlie Hustle Clothing Company. Charlie Hustle is a vintage-inspired clothing company based out of Kansas City, specializes in collegiate and hometown apparel. Charlie Hustle wants you to be the best-dressed fan this season. Be sure to check out their wide selection of licensed collegiate apparel today and show off your spirit all season long with over 30 schools to choose from. They've got you covered with all your collegiate apparel needs. Shop online at www.charliehustle.com. Charlie Hustle, vintage made fresh. Use the promo code TEN1215. That's TEN1215 for 15% off all non-sale items. We're also partnered with Prize Picks, which is the easy way to play daily fantasy sports with a wide variety of stats to choose from, including yards, touchdowns, and more. Prize Picks features mixed sport entries. If you would like to make entries on NFL, NCAA, MLB, and more, you can do so. Prize Picks offers every sport from football to basketball, baseball, college sports, and more. Download the easy-to-use Prize Picks mobile app. Make your entries in as quickly as 60 seconds. Prize Picks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. Use the code FROGS12, that's the code FROGS12 for a 100% deposit match up to $100. And lastly, we are, of course, partnered with the 1012 Network now here at Frogs Up. The network has launched a Patreon. If you would like to support the two of us here on Frogs Up or support the network, go to patreon.com/1012 Network. That's patreon.com/TEN12 Network to show your support. Okay. TCU, Nicholls State, week 2 of the college football season, the annual FCS opponent, the quote-unquote tune-up game for the Frogs at Amon G. Carter Stadium, Saturday night, 7 o'clock. TCU rocking the purple helmets, the purple jerseys, and the white pants for this one. And TCU going to be looking for its first win of the season. Of course, these FCS games are, like I mentioned, viewed as quote-unquote tune-up games. TCU hasn't really struggled in these matchups in the past, although last year the defense did, in my view, at least kind of underwhelm a little bit, gave up a couple of touchdowns to Tarleton State. But uh, overall, Anthony, any thoughts about Nicholls State and just these kinds of FCS matchups for TCU since TCU's been in the Big 12?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult I'm not going to pretend like I know a whole lot about Nicholls State and what they'll be bringing to Amon G. Carter Stadium this Saturday. I haven't done any deep dive scouting at the FCS level, and I think that Nicholls State, though, is traditionally a pretty solid program. Maybe not one of the best contending for FCS national championship levels, but they do bring in quality players. They often bring some FBS transfers down, and also some pretty significant JUCO transfers up to their level. So I think that they will definitely have some players, and I think this better be a tune-up for TCU. TCU has a lot of things to improve very clearly from last weekend's game against Colorado. Things that TCU will need to just really get their minds right going into the Big 12 opener, and then the Iron Skillet, and then the gauntlet of the Big 12 schedule. So, um, yeah, I think that it's nice to have these FCS games on the schedule. I think there's big opportunity for TCU to work through a lot of its playbook and a lot of its, I don't know, process issues that went through last week. Get a lot of people some play, but I kind of think that TCU will need to play starters pretty significantly here to really show, hey, uh, we've got things fixed. We know how this will work going forward. So we'll see how it all runs out. But I think that TCU's, yeah, this will not be a game maybe like what it was a while back now that they played. I think it was South Dakota that really put a scare in the Frogs as an FCS opponent way back. I don't know, maybe a decade or so. I think TCU was in the Big 12 by then, but um, yeah, I think it's really just, will TCU want to come out and play this game? That was something that was said by a lot of the players and the coaches after the Colorado game, that TCU was not really that motivated to come out and play football, and they will need to be motivated to go out and play football on Saturday.
Yeah, when we rolled out for those of you who follow us online at Frogs of War, frogsofwar.com, we had a opponent preview series that we rolled out about a month or so ago. And when I was writing about Nicholls State, one of the players that jumped out was Aldontre Davis, who was actually a former TCU receiver that transferred there and was one of their leading receivers last season. He's not there anymore. Um, they've lost quite a few starters on the offensive side of the ball, quite a few skill players, but they do have some returning starters at all three levels on defense. I think they have more players coming back on defense than offense. So um, looking to be a little more experienced on that end, but I think this is more about what TCU needs to do differently than what happened in the Colorado game. And I'll start with the offensive side of the ball because we gave our thoughts on the overall offensive performance after the Colorado game, and we discussed the turnovers, we discussed the penalties, some of the play calling, the play of Chandler Morris at the quarterback position. We talked about some of the positives. The wide receivers really showed out. Jared Wiley, the tight end, he had a great game. Amani Bailey, of course, was explosive. The offensive line didn't give up a sack. That was a positive that I think didn't really get talked about enough on social media after the game. But for me, going into this game, I need to see two big things from TCU. And the first big thing is I'd like to see a little more emphasis on running the football. I feel like there were times during that Colorado game where the Frogs were just trying to make Chandler Morris do a little bit too much, and they got away from the run two or three different times during the game where they were really moving the ball well and picking up chunks of yards on the ground. Amani Bailey averaged over 11 yards a carry in the game, and it just felt like TCU at times forgot that they were capable of running the football and running it well. So I'd like to see more balance in this game, more of a 50-50 split between runs and passes. And shoot, even if you have to run the ball 55 or 60% of the time, if you're moving it effectively and you're scoring points and picking up first downs, and that's what's going to help you win the football game, I think that's what you got to do to take some of that pressure off of Chandler Morris, who's still going to have a bit of a learning curve ahead of him as he doesn't have many starts under his belt as a college quarterback. So that's one big thing for me is more balance on offense in terms of the play calling, and then the penalties and the turnovers need to be cut down. Like that's pretty obvious there. The penalties especially, TCU had 10 penalties for 76 yards against Colorado. A lot of those were just stupid pre-snap mistakes, false start penalties, giving the opponent easy yards. Those penalties are just, mental lapses that come from not being prepared, not being locked in, not being ready to go. And when you're playing on your home field, that's rather inexcusable. So I think the goal really has to be zero penalties in this game on both sides of the ball, but especially on offense. And then you can't have red zone turnovers and expect to win football games against good teams, let alone any team. So that's where I have to start on offense. Anthony, what are your thoughts on what you need to see from the TCU offense in this game?
Yeah, clearly the discipline and that kind of do your job stuff has to be fixed going forward. But in addition to, yes, run the ball, dominate the day, score your points, win the game, I think I'd like to see the pass game have a little bit more, I don't know, something to it that is a little bit down the field. Take better shots. Obviously, no one for Nicholls State is going to be Travis Hunter out there defending the TCU wide receivers, but I think getting something going where Chandler Morris shows that he can make something happen down the field. Get Savion Williams involved. Get Dalen Wright, get Warren Thompson involved down the field. They are tall, athletic, physical bodies out there that can go and make plays and give them an opportunity to do that. It's great to be able to, find your dump offs to J.P. Richardson and to Jared Wiley, but I'd like to see the offense execute some of those more intermediate and deeper pass plays in addition to just, yes, clearly you should be winning the day at the line of scrimmage. And and frankly, TCU won the day on the line of scrimmage against Colorado. Um, and probably if just run the dang ball had been the game plan for every play, they probably win the game on last Saturday. But I think for going forward, something in these FCS games that you really want to see is, hey, can our offense execute in different ways? So I'd like to see that on Saturday.
And the defense, of course, was also a sore spot after the Colorado game. A lot of criticism levied at Joe Gillespie and TCU's defense for just seemingly looking unprepared and not playing with maximum effort. And Johnny Hodges, outside linebacker, had some comments speaking with the media that had me kind of raising my eyebrow a little bit. He talked about TCU being the laughing stock of college football, and saying that it's not difficult to go on social media and look at some clips where players seem to be taking plays off or not playing with maximum effort. And I thought those comments were interesting because it's pretty clear that as a leader on this defense and as a player who's coming in with high expectations, Johnny, he's looking to hold the defense accountable and hold the team accountable. So the defense absolutely needs to be better in this game. And I have a couple of players that I went back and watched, some of those highlight compilations on YouTube of the Colorado TCU game. And for all of the chunk yards that Colorado was gaining through the passing game, and even a couple of times on the ground, there were a couple of players that always seemed to be in the wrong spot at the wrong time, or always seemed to be trailing the play, or getting lost downfield in coverage. And one of those players is Bud Clark. I think Bud Clark had a pretty mediocre performance against Colorado, and it seemed that every time Colorado was able to execute long pass plays over the middle of the defense, it was because Bud Clark was getting lost in coverage or just maybe he slipped or couldn't find his man. So he needs to be better in this game. And Jamoy Hodge also, I know Anthony, you talked about Jamoy Hodge last week as a player to watch out for, as a guy who could be a game breaker for the TCU defense. And he seemed to struggle a bit too, missing some tackles and always seemed like he was trailing the play rather than uh, getting his helmet on the football. So those are two guys that I really hope step up and have a much better performance in this game, because those are two integral pieces of your defense, two experienced players that are way more talented at the end of the day than what they showed on the field last weekend. So I have that on my mind. And then also, I think the front three, this 3-3-5 defense, a lot of criticism has been generated on social media and by Frog fans because there just isn't a lot of pressure created by those front three guys. And I think with that 3-3-5 defense, you do at times rely on some pressure from your linebackers or even your secondary. But I think Dominic Williams and Caleb Fox, who did have a sack last weekend, Paul Oyewale, who did have a sack, Rick D'Abreu, the East Carolina transfer, Sonny Dykes said after the game that he was pleased with how he played and maybe he could get a little bit more run this weekend. But somebody's going to have to emerge in that front three, and I don't know if we've seen that yet. And of course, it's still really early in the season. Maybe somebody has a breakthrough against Nicholls State this weekend, but that's where I'm starting on the defensive side. Anthony, where are you starting on the defensive side, and what do you need to see this weekend?
Yeah, I'm looking at Mark Perry. I need to see Mark Perry show up in this game. I think some of those social media posts that Johnny Hodges was speaking about, I think are very clearly Mark Perry is either taking just a terrible angle at a running back out of the backfield, or is making a business decision to not attempt to tackle a running back at the goal line. Um, and if that's going to be your guy, and I know I really am not meaning to just pick on the guy, but we know that he can go out there and play better football than this, and I think he knows it. The team knows it, and so we have high expectations for that secondary, and he's one of the leaders of that secondary, returning starter, and we'd like to see him go out there and show some of that potential out there on the field. So that's the first one, and I think his role tends to be more of the run stopper guy. He's maybe not your coverage safety as much as Bud Clark is, and so if you're going to be that guy, you got to be able to be in the right spot to make tackles and in the right spot um, at the line of scrimmage. So disappointing first day, and want to see him improve. And the other piece that I think has a big day on Saturday, I'm looking at Paul Oyewale. You mentioned him, and your front needs to get pressure. I think he's the guy. I think he should be the Dylan Horton replacement on this team. And I think he showed good flashes of that against Colorado. I think he got some good pressure. He did get a sack. And that's he's going to be the guy that generates those kind of splash plays defensively from the defensive front. And I think he is ready for a big game this weekend. So that's where I'll be watching on the front of that defense. But just overall, we need to see that defensive effort. That was and maybe that is some of the play calling or the situations that this defense puts some of the linebackers in, where Jamoy Hodge simply should not be guarding the fastest player on the field in man coverage in pass plays or on swing pass plays. Um, that's it's just a bad situation. You're not gonna have a good time with a linebacker trying to chase, 4.2, 4.3 speed guys out of the backfield. Now, I don't expect, again, Nicholls State to have anyone like Dylan Edwards, but I'd still like to see maybe Jamoy Hodge used more in a attack the line of scrimmage, blitz the quarterback, and let Nnamdi Obiazor or Abe Kamara or somebody do that role of trailing the back out of the backfield.
Do you have a prediction for this game, Anthony? My prediction is pretty straightforward. I think TCU gets back on track this weekend. I think it's a extremely favorable matchup, and I have to believe if TCU doesn't come out this weekend with a more humble attitude and more hunger to get back to where it was last season, then we're going to have some serious problems. So I think TCU comes back out this weekend, and the offense is able to make up for the mistakes from last weekend. I think the defense will come out with a different attitude, a different approach, a different game plan. 56-7 was my final score. I think this is a game where TCU needs to come back and show what it's capable of, and I think the Frogs will do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm for my prediction, I'm going to predict a TCU win, a TCU comfortable win, but I do think that we still come away from this game not feeling confident that things are fixed or that TCU is about to go make a big run. I think TCU prediction I put down was 48-27, which is still a big win, but I think the defense still allows significant points here. Um, and maybe it's just I feel like I've been burned, and so I'm regressing too far in the other direction on my predictions for TCU going forward. But I think that TCU will score plenty of points. TCU will allow plenty of points as well, and still come away with a three-score win.
And we will ultimately see what happens this weekend, Saturday, 7 p.m., Amon G. Carter Stadium. TCU looking to improve to 1-1 on the season and set up a iron skillet contest against the SMU Mustangs, who will be in the ACC beginning in July of 2024. And this is something that had been brewing for several weeks in the aftermath of the realignment between the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac 12. For those of you who don't know, and I'm sure it's probably none of you, but just quickly to recap, the Pac 12 is on the verge of becoming extinct. Uh, Oregon and Washington are on their way to the Big Ten following USC and UCLA. The Big 12 has added 4 schools in Colorado, along with Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah. And now the ACC, in what's kind of I guess, the third phase of this realignment story that's happening. The ACC finally got the votes necessary to add Cal, Stanford, and SMU. Cal and Stanford are coming in and taking significantly reduced revenue shares. Meanwhile, SMU has agreed reportedly to take zero TV revenue for 9 years in order to make this happen. So those 3 schools are ACC bound. It will take effect next summer. ACC will go up to 18 member schools. Notre Dame, of course, is not a member school for football, but they are in the ACC for other sports. So uh, there's a lot to talk about here. But Anthony, what's your initial reaction to this expansion from the ACC, and does it make the ACC more competitive?
Well, it very clearly makes the ACC less competitive. I mean that Clemson and Florida State will now have easier games on their schedule than they would have had before. That is a fact. How long will those games be on the schedule? I mean, I don't think this does anything to persuade to calm the nerves of Florida State and Clemson as they look for greener pastures in the Big Ten or the SEC. This does put a little bit more money in their pockets, but it's not enough to get them up to where they feel like they need to be. So, I think that this holds together as a conference for a little bit longer. This stops the bleeding a little bit. But I think the Band-Aid is only so much. Um, as far as what it means for SMU, obviously SMU was going to do whatever it took to make this happen. It started out, oh, we'll give up 5 years. Then it looked like it was never going to happen, and so they said, we'll do 7 years, and then it still wasn't going to happen. Oh, we'll do 9 years, and that's finally what it took. They probably could have pushed SMU to just say we will never take TV money ever, and that still may be the case. I don't think there's any way that really any conference in its current form lasts for another 9 years. There's clearly going to be continued realignment happening as everybody just continues their grab for more money and more, TV real estate. So, I think good for SMU and Cal and Stanford that they have some place to play football in the future, that they'll get to be, racking up the airline points. That's terrific. You know, I think for SMU, it's just curious to me how this is, they're obviously buying their way into this conference, but if they have all this dedicated booster funding, why haven't they built a giant cathedral stadium in Dallas? Why haven't they, persuaded big time coaches to be there and stay there? Why haven't they won every NIL battle? If they've got hundreds of millions of dollars laying around you know, to fund this absence of TV revenue, why haven't they been using that money for the past 30 years? I think this is a little bit of uh, the money on paper that's there, and they hope that once they get in the foot in the door, that the real money will show up, and that may be the case. Maybe the real money does show up, but I don't think it makes the ACC any better. Um, it probably does retain those teams a little longer, which means that it retains the conference as a high level conference for a little bit longer.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that the ACC does not become any stronger from a competitive standpoint. I think it makes the conference worse. I think California has been one of the worst Power Five football programs in the country over the last few years. And as much as I want our boy Sam Jackson to be successful out there, I think it's going to be tough sledding for Cal. And Stanford obviously has had some great years in somewhat recent history, but Stanford has even struggled in football over the last few years, and then SMU is a G5 program that's going to be making a leap into the Power Five, really the Power Four atmosphere now. So I don't think this move makes the ACC any better in football. In basketball, maybe SMU brings some value there. SMU's had some good teams in recent years, but I mean, Cal and Stanford, they haven't really produced a whole lot in basketball either. So this is the most. At the end of the day, a lot of this is about the money. With Oregon and Washington moving, and then the four corner schools coming to the Big 12. We know at the end of the day that it's all about money. But this to me is the most money driven move out of all of the realignment things that have occurred. And I feel bad. I know I've brought this up in the past, but I feel bad for the student athletes in some of those non-football sports, especially the students that are going to be, playing at Cal and Stanford, and now you're going to have to be traveling across the entire United States just to be playing your conference games and your conference matches. And I know there are some reports coming out now that the ACC is considering using Dallas as a hub for some of their conference games, and I mean that seems like a significant investment in and of itself. I don't know how the heck that's gonna work, but um, when you consider how much money Cal and Stanford and SMU are giving up or forfeiting, they're basically subsidizing this for the other member schools that I think are going to get like I forgot what the total terms are. I know there was a report that came out that said ESPN would pay the conference, I want to say about $72 million more if they were able to add the three schools. And of course, that's why they're ultimately doing it. But I don't think it makes the ACC a better football conference. I don't think it makes the ACC a better basketball conference. And it just seems to kind of prolong the inevitable when you consider that Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina and Miami, the big brands in that conference, are clearly not happy with the current media deal. And
And they're not happy with this decision either. I mean, they've all put out statements of like, we voted against this and we got outvoted, which means they're probably just biding their time until they leave somewhere else. I mean, it's just inevitable.
yeah, you're 100% correct there. I think as soon as they have the money, as soon as Florida State has the money in that vault, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, they're gone, and that's going to be the next massive wave of realignment. But I think right now, I want to say that the Big 12 is probably done with realignment as of right now. The real attention is going to turn to the what's the Pac-2 now, or Tupac is the meme that's being spread on Twitter, with Oregon State and Washington State being the only two schools now left in that Pac-12 without a home. I know that with SMU moving to the ACC, the American Athletic is looking at adding Army. I think that's a cool move. Navy's already in the conference already, and I think to have Army and Navy playing each other in all sports would be a cool sight to see. And of course, the Army Navy game every year is always fun to watch. So the American Athletic looks like they're going to be uh, talking to Army about having Army come in and replace SMU. But there was also a quote that was put out about a week or so ago, I believe, from the AAC commissioner that said they're not interested in adding Oregon State or Washington State. And I don't think the Big 12 is interested either. I don't think the ACC is interested. And so, Anthony, in this, what I'll call, I guess, the fourth phase of this current stage of realignment, what do Oregon State and Washington State do now? Because the options seem pretty dismal at this point.
My favorite potential option of theirs is that there's an NCAA rule where you get a 2-year grace period for the conference like being dissolved. They can just be in a conference by themselves. They could play each other in a conference championship game for the opportunity to go to the NCAA tournament in basketball and baseball. They can, and if the playoff doesn't get changed for football, they can play each other and be called a conference champion for consideration for the college football playoff. Um, I think that's obvious, and then just play like an independent schedule the rest of their schedule. That is an interesting option. I think it's kind of fun and funny and kind of thumbs the nose at the whole thing, but um, I think most likely they just end up in some kind of merger with the Mountain West. It may retain some sort of Pac-12 like branding just because the brand is stronger. They've got the TV network. They've got all of the money in the bank from that, all the exit fees that these other teams are going to have to leave on the table, all of the shares of um, a playoff and bowls and NCAA tournament shares that will go to the conference will now just be sitting with these two. And so I think they become the big dogs of the Mountain West. It makes the Mountain West much more interesting. And I think the Mountain West can be a pretty competitive, compelling G5 level conference that will be very much competing for that, what will probably be the fifth conference champion spot in the college football playoff year in and year out. So I think that's the logical next step. I don't really see that any of these big conferences have any need to add them at this point. If the Big 12 wasn't going to jump on them right away, they're probably just not going to, unless there's really some smoke that the ACC lives forever. Then maybe you do it just to add more bodies to the conference. But with the likely event on the horizon that the ACC breaks up, next phase for Big 12 is to go find the top next candidates out of that rubble once it all falls apart.
Yeah, the long-term future play for both the Big Ten and the Big 12, and I think you could lump the SEC in there too, is wait for the ACC to deteriorate and then possibly poach some teams on the East Coast as opposed to the West Coast. But as far as Oregon State and Washington State, I think, like you said, a merger with the Mountain West seems inevitable. I'd be curious to see if they keep the Pac-12 name and the brand and that infrastructure that's in place there, or if they just choose to fold in with the Mountain West and they move forward with that conference. I think there's still some value in that Pac-12 name and that brand and the infrastructure that still exists. So that might be a little bit to work out behind the scenes, but that kind of seems like the logical step from a geographical standpoint, from a competitive standpoint. It's you got to feel for Oregon State and Washington State fans because they really did nothing to deserve what's happened to them. Unfortunately, it's just the in this realignment when these massive waves occur and the dominoes just fall in a certain manner and
The music stopped and there weren't enough chairs. They were left
correct,
standing, you know?
correct. So we will see what happens there. And speaking of the Big 12, there was a lot of Big 12 football played this past weekend, and a couple of pretty embarrassing losses from a few schools in the conference. We saw Wyoming knock off Texas Tech in double overtime. The Red Raider fans were kind of pumping their chests out before the season, talking about their recruiting class and how much talent they had on the team and possibly being a dark horse to win the conference. And you open the season with a loss in double overtime to Wyoming, and then we have Baylor going down in even more embarrassing fashion against Texas State. West Virginia played a very tough, very talented Penn State team, lost pretty handily there. A couple of teams that won semi convincingly slash unconvincingly. We saw BYU play a 14-0 win over Sam Houston State. Houston played a close matchup against UTSA. 17-14 was the final score of that one. And then Oklahoma State beating Central Arkansas by 2 touchdowns. I think Oklahoma State is going to have a tough year. I still don't think they have a quarterback, which was the biggest issue that Oklahoma State had last year was there were a lot of injuries, but there was a lot of inconsistent quarterback play. And I think 3 quarterbacks played in this game against Central Arkansas. I don't think any of them really looked that good. Anthony, any thoughts on what you saw from the Big 12 over the weekend? Anything that jumps out to you right away?
I think the biggest thing is Oklahoma should be your Big 12 favorite. Um, they probably should have been the Big 12 favorite going into the season. I had been beating the drum of Dylan Gabriel should be your dark horse Heisman. Obviously, they played a pretty bad Arkansas State team, but they looked really good doing it. I mean, Texas played a bad Rice team and looked less good doing it. Um, and, part of that is Texas is probably certainly looking ahead to this week's matchup in Tuscaloosa, but I think Oklahoma State and Kansas State right now, if you were picking who's playing in Arlington in December, that's who you would project. UCF looked really good, but they were playing a terrible Kent State team. And yeah, I think it helped TCU fans to ease some of the how downtrodden we all were after Saturday's loss to then go see the events unfolding in Waco and the events unfolding in Laramie to that okay, well, we're not the only ones suffering today. It's also some of our conference brethren. So that's at least 2 teams nationally who are unable to point and laugh at TCU's troubles from last week. So that was nice to see. But big picture wise, I think Oklahoma and Kansas State were the most impressive. They did have easy opponents, but and then UCF would be next. I think this next week is going to tell us a whole lot more about what this conference is. Some huge games on the agenda for week 2. Oregon coming to Lubbock, Utah coming to Waco. I think both of those could be more interesting than you might expect after both those teams lost embarrassingly last Saturday. So just look out for those. And then, of course, the big Texas game against Alabama, I think, will be an interesting national benchmark game of whether Texas is back in all caps, bold exclamation points back.
Yeah, Texas struggled, I think, offensively in that first half against Rice. Quinn Ewers, a lot's been made of his inability to connect on the deep ball, and his first half performance didn't really do a whole lot to alleviate those concerns. But they did play a much better second half. Cincinnati had a really good performance. Kansas looked good. Jalen Daniels, I don't think he played in
He
this
didn't
game.
play.
I think Jason
Mm-mm.
Bean. So, Anthony, do you know what is that a injury thing?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. He suffered some kind of injury that it was seemed like he was going to be fine, and then there were whispers of him not playing maybe a day or two before the game, and then game day the whispers became a little bit louder, and then yeah, it was announced officially right ahead of game time that he was not going to be playing. So I think he's supposed to be back this next week. I mean, it's one thing in college football where you don't get like formal official injury reports, so it's hard to know for sure, but I think he's expected to be back going forward, and he was just kind of held out for precaution for that first game.
Yeah, I was curious to see that because I was watching the box score and I saw Jason Bean's name pop up. And I mean, us TCU fans know all too well that Jason Bean is capable
He's no
of
joke.
playing at a high level and putting up some yards and some touchdowns. So uh, Jalen Daniels, I think when he gets healthy though, is still a candidate to wind up as one of the top quarterbacks in the conference, if not the top quarterback. For me, I think from a overall standpoint, it's obviously still early, but I think it kind of reaffirmed over the weekend that I felt coming into the season that TCU's front half of the schedule was going to be uh, easier to navigate than the second half. And I think this opening weekend kind of confirmed that for me with, Iowa State didn't look overly impressive. West Virginia, of course, played a really tough team, but I'm not expecting a whole lot from West Virginia this year. Houston, I think playing that game on the road makes it
That's a
interesting.
tough game. That UTSA team's really good too. That was a tough game. That was a big win for them to go and get that win.
And that with that being Houston's first game in the Big 12, I think there's going to be a lot of hype surrounding that game. But I still think the second half of the schedule with Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas State is going to be a tougher road than the first half.
Yeah, that said, part of what made that second half look so scary was it also included games in Lubbock and against Baylor, both of whom looked pretty bad. So, I think in some ways, yes, there's certainly some boogeymen at the end of the schedule, but we may feel a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel just because maybe those teams aren't as good as we were concerned about at the beginning of the year, which they would probably all be saying the same thing about TCU. Maybe TCU is not as good as they were worried about. So those will it's going to be a very interesting conference race, particularly because we don't have the true round robin. So there'll be some teams who just have easier schedules, and so it'll be interesting to see how the race shakes out into October, November.
Hmm. Anthony, any final thoughts from you before we sign off for the evening? I know we've hit on everything that we've wanted to. Again, TCU Nicholls State, Saturday, 7 p.m., Amon G. Carter. Come out, wear your purple, support the Frogs, and hopefully it'll be a successful weekend, not only for TCU, but for all the teams in the Big 12 as well.
Yeah, make sure to keep coming out to the games, keep supporting this team. I mean, I obviously last week got the huge fan support, the largest crowd ever at Amon G. Carter Stadium, and it would be a shame to come back out the next week and have it half full out there. So Frog fans do continue to come out and support the team. The game is broadcast on ESPN Plus, so if you're not a ESPN Plus subscriber or a streaming type person, it'll probably end up being cheaper to just come out to the game than it would be to get your ESPN Plus subscription. So just come on out to the Carter and check out some football. Um, Last thing, I guess, before closing out here, NFL starts this week. This will probably go up Thursday, first game of the NFL season. So looking forward to seeing what the Pro Frogs do this weekend. Um, Kendre Miller and the Saints are taking on my Tennessee Titans, so hope he has a good game, but maybe they don't pull out the win there. And Quentin Johnston will have his first game, so it'll just be exciting to see some of these guys go out there and compete at the pro level. And with that, hey, there's still time on Prize Picks with code Frogs12 for your 100% deposit match up to $100. Go get some looks at the NFL player projections that are up there. You still have time for your season player projections. So, one of my favorites is Quentin Johnston is more or less 599 yards for the season. So if you think Quentin Johnston could get 600 yards, go in there and throw a more on it and get yourself a win.
And if you need to get your TCU swag for this weekend or for the rest of the season, go to www.charliehustle.com. Use the promo code TEN1215, TEN1215, get 15% off all non-sale items. And again, if you would like to show your support for the two of us on the Frogs Up podcast or the 1012 network, please consider donating to the Patreon at patreon.com/TEN12 network. We are also continuing our coverage of all things TCU sports online with Frogs of War, www.frogsofwar.com. Be sure to continue following us on Twitter and Facebook at Frogs of War as well, in addition to our website. That will do it for this evening. We will be back recording Sunday night, where we will recap the Nicholls State football game and discuss whatever else is going on in the TCU athletics universe and the college football world. So with that, we will sign off for the evening. Frogs up.
Get your frogs up.